All right, well, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. We have David and Jenny McClure with us tonight, and David's going to talk to us on learning lessons from Shiloh, part one. So, in the absence of our dear brother Barry, he's company chairman tonight, obviously, but Jamie said I didn't have Barry's humour, so probably don't. We'll start with a prayer and then we'll do a reading. And we're going to ask Brother Nick to start us off with the prayer, please. Okay, so David's asked if we take a reading from Jeremiah 17.
7 verse 1 to 12.
7 verse 1 to 12. And we'll ask Paul to lead us in that reading. So start to follow along. Jeremiah 7, 1 to 12. Yeah, thanks very much, Paul. And well, any presentation that starts in Jeremiah is at least intriguing, if not fascinating. So we'll hand over to you. Thanks, Brother David.
All right. Thanks, Jeremy, and lovely to see you all, brothers and sisters. I'll have to kind of move my neck around a fair bit and leave them in there tonight. So sorry for those who are there. You might get the back of my head a fair bit, but I'll try and engage a fair bit as much as I can. Well, this is part one, as Jeremy said, over the course of tonight and next Wednesday night, God willing, we'll be looking at the subject of Shiloh. Now, it's probably a mixture here. Some of you guys may know heaps about Shiloh, so I apologise that this might seem a bit basic, but some might know very little about Shiloh. So hopefully by looking at this most significant place in the land of Israel, we'll come away with some information about Shiloh, but more importantly, learn the lessons from Shiloh. So there's no point and little value in talking for 2 nights about the geography of Shiloh, where it was located and what it looked like, or even its history. The greatest value of looking at a subject like a place in the land of Israel is looking at, well, what took place there and are there spiritual lessons for us to learn and take away? And I believe when we look at the subject of Shiloh, there are some really important spiritual lessons that we learn from a place in the land of Israel. But before we look at Shiloh as a place, we want to look at another place in the land of Israel. All right, that's not responding, so there we are. A place called Yad Vashem. Now, has anyone been to Israel and gone to that place, Yad Vashem? Any hands in the air? Fran? Anyone else? Jenny? Darren? So some have been to a place called Yad Vashem. Yad Vashem means a memorial or a name, and those sort of ideas, name and memorial, come out and resonate as we go through our study tonight. But a quiz to start with, and this is pretty hard for those who haven't been to Yad Vashem, but a quick quiz on Yad Vashem, in the land of Israel now. So you can go to a place called Yad Vashem in Israel. Is it A, a place for joyous celebration about the birth of a new nation? Or is it B, a place for memorializing major Jewish military victories? Or C, is it a place for sober reflection about what has occurred in the past? Hands up for A. No one's going to select. Hands up for B. Hands up for C. Right. Even those who haven't been to Yad Vashem have guessed right. Because Yad Vashem is a place for sober reflection about what has occurred in the past. It's, of course, the Holocaust Museum in the land of Israel. You go there and you see lots of walls with lots of photographs, lots of text, and it's a memorial for what took place in the Holocaust. And it's a place for those in the land of Israel and for those who are visiting Israel to go there and to reflect very soberly about what has taken place in the past, and for men and women who go to Yad Vashem to learn lessons about the past, right? And those sort of ideas of place for sober reflection to think about what has occurred in the past will resonate with us over the next 2 evenings, because in a way, that's the purpose of what Shiloh was for those in the times of Jeremiah, and also a time for us today. It's a place in the land of Israel where we can go to reflect very soberly upon what has occurred in the past and to learn lessons. And so I see a great connection between Shiloh and Yad Vashem. We're going to start our class by looking at Jeremiah chapter 7 and the use that Jeremiah made of Shiloh in this passage. Before we provide information about Shiloh's geography and history. And tonight we're going to be really setting a lot of background information. Towards the end of our class, the lessons that come from Shiloh will start to come into our minds, but tonight it's going to be a lot of background setting, and then next Wednesday night, I think, just hang in there with me, we'll start to lay out the really key lessons for us, but we'll get there towards the end of the night, hopefully, as well. Now, of course, Jeremiah was God's long-suffering prophet to the nation of Judah at the end of Judah's existence, before the Babylonians came down and destroyed the nation and sacked the city of Jerusalem. That's the time period of Jeremiah. And here in chapter 7, as Paul read, God told Jeremiah to go to the temple that was located at Jerusalem and to proclaim a message on his behalf. And in Jeremiah 7, we have the first of 3 temple addresses that were given by Jeremiah. So Jeremiah 7 and verses 1 to 2, the word that came to Jeremiah from Yahweh, saying, stand in the gate of Yahweh's house at Jerusalem, proclaim there this word, and say, hear the word of Yahweh, all ye of Judah, that enter in at these gates to worship Yahweh. And so the temple at Jerusalem, the people are going through that place to worship God, and Jeremiah is told by God, go and stand at the front of the temple. And Jeremiah's message, as Paul read, was very simple. It was to change their ways. Verse 3, thus saith Yahweh of hosts, the God of Israel, amend, make well, to make beautiful your ways and your doings, and I'll cause you to stay in this place. I'll cause you to dwell here in the land of Israel and here at Jerusalem. We're going to come back to Jeremiah 7 at the end of our class tonight and at the beginning of next Wednesday night. But at this stage, I just want to draw your attention to verse 12, where we have mention of Shiloh. So in the context of Jeremiah here at Jerusalem, here at the temple, appealing to the nation on God's behalf to change your way of life, God tells Jeremiah to include this in your message. Verse 12, but go ye now unto my place, which was in Shiloh, where I set my name at the first, and see what I did to it for the wickedness of my people Israel. So the message of Jeremiah to those of his day, go to Shiloh. Here was a place in the land of Israel for sober reflection, a place for them to go and to think about what had occurred in the past, a place for them to go and learn lessons from. Go to Shiloh was a message of God through the prophet Jeremiah to those in the days of Jeremiah. Right, that's enough of the prophet Jeremiah at the moment. We're going to now look at the geography of Shiloh in the land of Israel and its history. But before we do that, we want to go to a rather strange reference to Shiloh in the Bible. I always think Bible class is a great opportunity for us to learn more about the Word of God, particularly to draw out lessons, but it's also an opportunity for us to look at some rather obscure passages and to find out, well, as we read our Bibles, what does that obscure passage about that thing really mean? And we can't deal with the subject of Shiloh without looking at the very first mention of Shiloh in the Bible. And had it been just a one night class, I wouldn't go to this passage. But because we've got two nights and because the word Shiloh is here in this passage, let's go and find out and learn. And so next time we read this passage, we'll know, oh, I know what that's talking about. Does anyone know the first use of the word Shiloh in the Bible?
Genesis.
Genesis. What chapter, Fran?
I don't know the chapter, but it was Jacob's prophecy, wasn't it?
Great. Let's go to Genesis 49, where we have, as Fran has said, the prophecy that Jacob gave in relation to his sons towards the end of his life. And here in Genesis 49, he makes reference to Shiloh. And so we need to understand, well, what is this reference to Shiloh on about? So we know that it's a prophecy concerning the sons of Jacob from verse 1 of Genesis 49. And Jacob called unto his sons and said, gather yourselves together, that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the last days. So it's a prophecy of what's going to take place to the tribes, the sons of Jacob in the last days. And in verses 8 through to 12, we have what is said by Jacob of one of his sons. It's the son Judah. So let's read verses 8 through to 12. Judah, thou art he whom thy brethren shall praise. Thy hand shall be in the neck of thine enemies. Thy father's children shall bow down before thee. So Judah's going to have some preeminence over the other sons of Jacob. Verse 9, Judah's aligns well. From the prey, my son, thou art gone up. He stooped down, he couched as a lion, and as an old lion, who shall rouse him up? Words in verse 10, which we know quite well, the scepter, the kingship, shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be. Binding his foal unto the vine, his ass's colt unto the choice vine. He washed his garments in wine, and his clothes in blood of grapes. His eyes shall be red with wine, and his teeth white with milk. As we go through those verses, the language is quite unusual, and it's not my role tonight to go through all of the ideas in those verses. But just to highlight the fact that in verse 10, we have the first mention in the Bible of Shiloh. Most Bible translations, and that includes the ESV, the NIV, and the NET, and some of you guys might have those translations on your lap or on your device tonight. Those Bible translations all include notes about this unusual passage in verse 10, the reference to Shiloh. And they say, well, does that reference to Shiloh in verse 10, is it a reference to the place of Shiloh, which is located in the land of Israel, which we'll see in a few moments? Is it a reference to a place? Well, the language quite doesn't seem to be the case, because in actual fact, it's talking about the tribe of Judah. And in actual fact, as we'll see in a few moments, Shiloh was located not in Judah, but in Ephraim. It doesn't quite read as in verse 10 as if it's talking about a place. Does reference to Shiloh refer to an individual like David or to Jesus Christ? Well, according to, and some of you guys might have a marginal note about this, but according to a number of Bible translations, ancient manuscripts do not refer to Shiloh in verse 10. Rather, instead of Shiloh, they have the expression to whose it is. And the translations refer to this as a correction of the text, pointing to the expression to whose it is as being more correct. And so let's read verse 10 again using this expression for Shiloh. And so the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until to whose it is, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be. And so this is why translations such as the NIV and the NET don't have Shiloh here in verse 10, but has the expression until he comes to whom it belongs. Now, has anyone here tonight got an NIV or an NET? Can you read, what do you got? Yes, what translation are you reading from? Let's hear from the NIV verse 10. And keep going through. Yep.
Nor the ruler star from between his feet until he comes to whom it belongs. The dominions of the nations is his.
Right. So instead of having Shiloh, that translation, as well as a few others, has until he comes to whom it belongs. Yes?
As until that can come in as a Shiloh.
All right. There are some translations that still have Shiloh in that verse, but that's worded quite differently. But the ancient manuscripts seem to indicate that it's talking about someone's coming whose right it is. Now, if that's the case, is there an echo to another well-known Bible passage that we perhaps are more familiar with? Ezekiel 21 and verse 7, a first principle passage which goes along these lines. I will overturn, 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 and it shall be no more until he comes whose right it is, and I'll give it to him. So that Ezekiel 21 passage, who is that? Who do we normally attribute that as speaking about? Until he comes whose right it is. Jesus Christ. Right? So the kingship is taken away from Zedekiah in Ezekiel 21, and a person will come eventually whose right it is, and I'll give it to him. All right. Now that's a bit of a digression, but I thought because we had a bit of time up our sleeve, the next time you read about Shiloh in Genesis 49 verse 10, hopefully that's what you'll remember. It's not talking about Shiloh in the land of Israel, talking about someone who's to come, whose right it is. And of course, we can see the Lord Jesus Christ as being from the tribe of Judah. He will be the person to sit upon the throne of the kingdom of Judah. Make sense? All right. So hopefully you've learnt something from the very first reference to Shiloh in the Bible.
What was the verse in Ezekiel 21?
21 verse 27. Right, let's turn our attention now to the geography of Shiloh in the land of Israel. Right, you can see from that particular map that Shiloh is smack bang in the middle of the nation. You can see that would be interesting in view of some of the things we're going to say in a few moments' time. But there it is in the land of Israel in the middle. It's approximately 45 kilometers north of Jerusalem, approximately 15 kilometers north of Bethel, located in the tribe of Ephraim. Now, has anyone been to the land of Israel and been to the site of ancient Shiloh? No one? Yeah, have. Well, come here, Joan. Honey, Joan. So you've been to Shiloh. What's there at Shiloh?
Building on the hill, in memory of everything that's gone on there. It's quite interesting.
Is there a city there at Shiloh?
Yeah, no, they've got all the diggings. I've got it in my albums. Yeah, archaeology is digging up all the Shiloh. It's quite a lot exposed.
Good. So if you went to Shiloh today, you would see that. Not much of a city. It's just ruins, and there's been quite extensive archaeological digs at Shiloh. So you've probably seen that as well, ain't you, Jane? Did you?
All of it.
Good. And you've got a brochure here which we can.
Got more in the book.
Good, excellent. So the thing about, if you've been to Shiloh and the land of Israel now, you see nothing except that. Apparently Shiloh has an excellent, or was an excellent location for a city, because there was a city at one stage there at Shiloh, and we'll speak about that in a few moments. It was located near a fertile valley. Land of Israel, for those who have been to the land of Israel, it's a land of hills and valleys, and Shiloh was just one of those hills and valleys sort of locations, capable of growing enough food for the city's inhabitants. The city and surrounding farmlands had access to dependable water sources. In addition, the mount, or the tell, on which the city was dwelt had steep slopes on three sides, making it easy to defend. And so it was a very useful place for a city to be located on. Now, it's very interesting, when I did a bit of research into Shiloh, quite a bit was written about what I'm going to talk about next. Tests have been done at Tel Shiloh, indicating that it has excellent acoustic qualities. In the 1970s, a sound engineer by the name of Mark Miles conducted acoustic tests at this place. And he said it was the quietest spot that he'd ever measured. Measured lots of spots throughout the world, but Shiloh was the quietest spot he'd ever measured. Quiet enough to hear a human voice clearly at a distance of 500 meters. The shape of the landscape around Shiloh makes it possible for sound to travel large distances. And so you can imagine that Shiloh was a sort of place where a great group of people would be assembled. And a person out the front could issue a command, issue some instruction about what was to take place, and the whole congregation would hear it because of the excellent acoustic qualities of Shiloh. Let's park the geography to one side and now look at its history. Location of Shiloh is first mentioned after Genesis 49, which isn't actually the location, but if you come to Joshua chapter 18, we have the first recorded mention of Shiloh, the place. Before we go there, we're going to take a detour, not in Joshua 18, but let's go, before we look at Joshua 18, to Deuteronomy chapter 12. Important that we look at Deuteronomy chapter 12 before we look at Joshua chapter 18. Can anyone tell me what the book of Deuteronomy is about? What is Deuteronomy all about? Who's talking here in Deuteronomy, and where is Israel located? Moses. The book of Deuteronomy is speeches given by Moses to Israel at what time period in the nation's history? On the border of the land, they're about to enter the land that God had promised to them. So they've been through the wilderness. They're about to enter the promised land. They're about to finally take possession of the land under Joshua, but Moses wants to talk to them before they go into the land. So that's the context of Deuteronomy. Let's have a look at Deuteronomy chapter 12 to see what Moses says to them about what they're to do when they are to go into the land. Deuteronomy 12 and verses 1 to 5. These are the statutes and judgments which ye shall observe to do in the land which Yahweh God of thy fathers gives thee to possess it, all the days that ye live upon the earth. Ye shall utterly destroy the places wherein the nations which ye shall possess serve their gods, upon the high mountains, and upon the hills, and under every green tree. And ye shall overthrow their altars, break their pillars, and burn their groves with fire. Ye shall hew down the graven images of their gods, and destroy the names of them out of that place. Ye shall not do so unto Yahweh your God. And note verse 5. But unto the place which Yahweh thy God shall choose out of all your tribes to put his name there, even unto his habitation shall ye seek, and thither thou shalt come. You'll notice in reading those verses, brothers and sisters, young people, there's a contrast between verse 2, talking about the places where the Canaanites would worship their many gods. And so in contrast to the places which are going to be destroyed by Israel when they enter the land, verse 5 speaks about not places plural, but there's going to be a place singular, which Yahweh your God shall choose. Verse 5 is a really interesting verse, and it kind of lends itself to almost like a mini Bible study. So if you're going to conduct a mini Bible study of verse 5, what stands out to you in verse 5 about the key message that God is conveying to us in verse 5? What would you be drawn to in verse 5? What sort of words and ideas? Right. That's one thing. There's going to be God's habitation. And that word habitation means to reside, to lodge, to permanently stay. That's the idea behind that word habitation. It's a good suggestion, Lizzie. What other thoughts or words in verse 5 would lend yourself to do a bit of extra work on? Right. God's going to choose a place, and he's going to put his name there. And this place is going to be a place where he wants to reside or permanently stay. And what does it say at the end of the verse? This place where God selects to place his name, he wants people to seek. And the idea of seeking, that word seek means to tread, to frequent, to beat or to rub apart, to trample with your feet. It's like, and I see you've got tiles here, Auntie Joan, but if you had carpet here and you always had people coming down the aisle here, when they would beat a path along the carpet, and your carpet would be pristine throughout the whole house, but this path that people frequent, you'd see that people frequented this part of the house because the carpet's warm. If we've got carpet in our homes, we've all got places which is warm because that's where people frequent. So what God is saying here is, I'm going to select a place out of all the tribes of Israel to place my name. And that's going to be my habitation. I want to reside there permanently. And I want people to frequent this place. I want them to beat a path up to this place which I choose out of all the tribes to place my name.
It says, you shall seek and you shall go. Very personal to them, hey?
Exactly right. And it's not as if that's the only mention in Deuteronomy 12 of God selecting a place. Look at verse 11. Then, and I've got these highlighted in my Bible because it's a real emphasis in Deuteronomy 12. Then there shall be a place which Yahweh your God shall choose to cause his name to dwell there. Beginning of verse 14. But in the place which Yahweh shall choose in one of thy tribes. Verse 18. But thou must eat them before Yahweh thy God in the place which Yahweh thy God shall choose. Verse 21. If the place which Yahweh thy God hath chosen to put his name there be too far, then so forth, and then find the end of verse 26. There's the place choose. Those that perhaps are taking notes, I want to put things in your margin, this idea of a place for God to select to place his name there throughout all the tribes. It's there in Deuteronomy 14 and verses 23, 24, and 25. It's there in Deuteronomy 16, verse 2, 6, and 11. A repetition in the book of Deuteronomy about a place that God will choose to put his name there. And he wants the people to seek that place and come to it. Well, let's come over to Joshua chapter 18 and look at what was this place that God chose to place his name. Joshua 18 and verse 1. And the whole congregation of the children of Israel assembled together at Shiloh and set up the tabernacle of the congregation there, and the land was subdued before them. That word Shiloh means to be at rest, to be tranquil. Kind of quite interesting, the context of verse 1 that speaks about the land being subdued, and they assembled here at a place called rest, and it's here that the tabernacle was established. No information is provided in Joshua chapter 18 as to indicate why Shiloh was selected by Joshua. Perhaps it was some of the geographical features that we noted earlier. Great acoustic abilities, very fertile, a great water supply. However, we've noted from the words of Deuteronomy, particularly Deuteronomy chapter 12, that God would choose the place. And so we assume that Shiloh was God's selection of a place out of all the tribes of Israel where he would place his name and for people to seek. God chose Shiloh in the territory of Ephraim to be the center of worship for the nation and to operate like a capital city. And God wanted people from the whole nation to frequent this place and to be the path to Shechem, or rather to Shiloh, to worship him there. Further to the history of Shiloh, we find that not only did Joshua establish the tabernacle there, but the territory to be allocated to the tribes, that was determined by lots at Shiloh before Yahweh. The cities allocated to the Levites, well, that was determined by lots at Shiloh. Later in the book of Joshua, when it appeared that tribes on the east of Jordan had set up an altar for false worship, the army of the tribes on the west of Jordan assembled at Shiloh to go to battle. And so Shiloh operated in the days of Joshua and in the days of Judges, right through to the early days of Samuel the prophet as the capital city of the nation. Reference is made in Judges chapter 18, verse 31, to the house of God in Shiloh. And those who have done excavations at Shiloh believe that the tabernacle was located in that rough area at the foothills of the mountain in the valley in the area of Shiloh. And so it was during the period of Joshua and the Judges and into the early days of Samuel the prophet, a period of about 350 years, Shiloh stood as the capital of Israel and where the center of worship was established. Now, question, what was the time period of the Judges like? Anyone like to tell me that? What was the time period of the Judges like?
Lots of challenges, sin, suffering, salvation, and supplication.
Doing whatever they wanted, their own eyes.
Right, that's a great expression because that comes out of the book of Judges where everyone did that which was right in their own eyes. No king. And it was probably the darkest period in the nation's history, the time period of the judges, where lots of sin, suffering. The people were resorted to seek God, but it was only because the invader was at their doorsteps and God saved them. It was a dreadful period. And it's a really interesting exercise to go through the book of Joshua and Judges and to look for references to priests and Levites. And what you'll find, if you did that little bit of study, you'd find that very few references to priests and Levites in those books of the Bible. And invariably, if there is reference to particularly the Levites, it's in a really bad environment, a really bad story involving Levites, particularly towards the end of the book of Judges. Levites were kind of highlighted as being the very reverse of what God had established the Levites for, to be teachers in the nation. And you've got dreadful stories about Levites in this area. And little wonder the nation during the times of the judges were in such a dreadful situation, because the priests and the Levites weren't providing great spiritual education. Now, there's a very telling passage in the book of Judges about Shiloh. Come over to Judges chapter 19, Judges chapter 21 and verse 19, about Shiloh. And in this passage, it's in a really bad part of the book of Judges where the tribe of Benjamin is almost on the verge of being extinguished. Only 600 men, no women left in Benjamin, only 600 men remained in the tribe of Benjamin. And the elders of the nation that had really brought this about thought, oh, what are we going to do about this? And they concocted a situation where they allowed the daughters at Shiloh that would be dancing in the fields to be taken by these 600 men. But the interesting thing about Judges 21 and verse 19 is that these elders, when they're talking about their plan, is describing the location of Shiloh. So look at verse 19. And they said, behold, there is a feast of Yahweh in Shiloh yearly, in a place which is on the north side of Bethel, on the east side of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem, and on the south of Lebonah. Now, what's been described there, it might seem an unusual verse, but it's describing this. The elders are saying, this Shiloh place, well, it's north of Bethel. And there's a highway that runs from Bethel further north to Shechem. And Shiloh is just east of that highway. And it's just south of a town called Lebonah. Now, does that description strike something unusual in your minds? What comes to your mind when you think that here in the book of Judges, we've got such specific information of Shiloh as a location? That's my conclusion as well. I mean, Shiloh, we're to make a trek there annually. We're to be the path of Shiloh. It's the place in the land of Israel. God's placed his name. We all know where Shiloh is. But maybe they didn't during the time period of judges, because people had lost their spiritual direction. And so when these people are talking about Shiloh, they've got to give specific instruction of how to find Shiloh. It would be like, Brother Jeremy sending an email out to the members of the Hunter Valley Ecclesia, reminding the members of the Ecclesia that memorial meetings are held regularly at your hall at Dora Creek. And in the email, Jeremy adds details about how to find your meeting place. And he says, well, it's north of Sydney. And there's a highway that runs from Sydney to Newcastle. And Dora Creek is just east of this highway, just south of Toronto. You can't say, Jeremy, we don't need that information, because we know, hopefully we know where the Ecclesia meets. But maybe over time you forget that because you're not beating a part to the meeting. And Jeremy in his emails has got to spell out all that information. So I think that's a really interesting passage in the book of Judges, which highlights that I think Shiloh had become a bit of a backwater. And the priests were there trying to do I don't know. But there was one family that knew exactly where Shiloh was. Let's turn our Bibles open to 1 Samuel chapter 1. This family knew exactly where Shiloh was. No need to get the details of it being east of this highway which runs from Bethel to Shechem, and it's just south of Lebona, but verse 1 to 3 of the book of Samuel, first book of Samuel. Now there was a certain man of Ramathaim Zophim of Mount Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah, the son of Jeraham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zaph, an Ephrathite. And he had two wives. The name of the one was Hannah, the name of the other Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. And this man went up out of his city yearly to worship and to sacrifice unto Yahweh of hosts in Shiloh. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, the priests of Yahweh, were there. And so Shiloh as a place in the land of Israel, closely linked to the early days of Samuel the prophet. Samuel was there with Eli the priest, and Samuel worked in the tabernacle that was located at Shiloh. But we have a very ominous note at the end of verse 3 of 1 Samuel 1. The two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, the priests of Yahweh, were there. They were dreadful men. Let's turn over to chapter 2 and verses 12 through to 17. A fairly long passage, but we read it because this is the behavior of the priests during the early stages of the life of Samuel. And their behavior here is at the place where God said, I'm going to select a place in the land of Israel out of all the tribes. I'm going to select a place to place my name. And I want this place to be my habitation, my permanent residing place. And I want people out of all the nation to be a part of this place. But look what was happening at the place where God wanted his name to be. Verse 12 of 1 Samuel 2. Now the sons of Eli were sons of Belial. They knew not Yahweh. And the priest's custom with the people was that when any man offered sacrifice, the priest's servant came while the flesh was in the seething, with a flesh hook of 3 teeth in his hand, and he stuck it into the pan or the kettle or cauldron or pot. All that the flesh hook brought up, the priest took for himself. So they did in Shiloh unto all the Israelites that came thither. And also before they burnt the fat, the priest servant came and said to the man that sacrificed, give flesh to roast for the priest, but he will not have sodden flesh of thee, but raw. And if any man said unto him, let them not fail to burn the fat presently, and then take as much as thy soul desires, then he would answer him, nay, but thou shalt give it to me now, and if not, I will take it by force. Wherefore the sin of the young men was very great before Yahweh, for men abhorred the offering of Yahweh. And also in verse 22, now Eli was very old and heard all that his sons did unto all Israel, and how they lay with the women that assembled at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. The behavior is appalling. And this is at the tabernacle, place of worship. And you picture a family in one of the tribes of Israel discussing whether they should go up to the feast that's going to be held at Shiloh. The father's talking, well, we went up last year and I was beaten up by the priests. And I had to rescue my daughter from being molested by the priests. And another family in one of the northern tribes saying, I'll go by myself this year. It's not safe for my wife. It's not safe for my daughters, nor my sons to travel down to the tabernacle at Shiloh. That's a picture that's been painted of what life was like the days of the judges and the early life of Samuel the prophet. It's a place where God wanted his name to be. Things of God weren't practiced at all here at Shiloh. And in 1 Samuel chapter 2, towards the end of the chapter, God appears to Eli and pronounces judgment upon Eli's house. He pronounces judgment upon Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas. They're going to die in one day. But also in 1 Samuel chapter 2 and verse 32, he pronounces judgment upon something else as well. Turn over to chapter 2 and verse 32. The words of God to Eli. And thou, Eli, shall see an enemy in my habitation, my dwelling place, the place that I sought to dwell permanently. You'll see an enemy in that place. The NIV has the beginning of verse 32 as, and you will see distress in all my dwelling. But this was the place that God had chosen out of all the tribes to place his name. Surely he would spare Shiloh from the enemy. After all, the tabernacles here at Shiloh, surely he won't bring an enemy into Shiloh. Well, we know the dramatic events which were recorded in 1 Samuel chapter 4. The Philistines attacked. Israel was defeated, and they had brought the ark out as some sort of a lucky charm. Hophni and Phinehas had this great idea. Let's bring the ark out to battle. Surely God will save us. Israel was defeated. The ark taken by the Philistines. Hophni and Phinehas slain in battle. Eli broke his neck and died with the shock of losing the ark. It was one of Israel's darkest days. You might say, well, go on. What happened to Shiloh, the place that God had selected out of all the tribes to place his name? Surely spared. Well, 1 Samuel chapter 4 doesn't tell us what happened to Shiloh. But if you turn over to Psalm 68, Psalm 78, Psalm 78 tells us what does take place at Shiloh. The battery's very low, but with the slides. And the tribes of Israel to dwell in their tents. And then from verse 56 to 59, the times of the judges. Yet they tempted and provoked the Most High God, and kept not his testimonies, but turned back and dealt unfaithfully like their fathers. They were turned aside like a deceitful bow, for they provoked him to anger with their high places, and moved him to jealousy with their graven images. When God heard this, he was wroth, and greatly abhorred Israel, so that he forsook the tabernacle of Shiloh. He abandoned, as that expression forsook means, he abandoned the tabernacle of Shiloh, the tent which he'd placed among men, and delivered his strength, the ark, into captivity, and his glory into the enemy's hand. He gave his people over to the sword, and was wroth with his inheritance. The fire consumed their young men, and their maidens were not given in marriage. Their priests fell by the sword, and their widows made no lamentation. God had chosen to place his name there. But in verse 60, he forsook the tabernacle of Shiloh, the tent which he had placed among men. And so from these verses in Psalm 78, we conclude that Shiloh was razed to the ground by the Philistines, but not before the tabernacle was moved from Shiloh to Nob, as impending destruction loomed over Shiloh. So the Philistines razed Shiloh to the ground, the place which God had decided to place his name, and it's gone. We're going to leave our class at that point, but to start getting you to think about the lessons which come from Shiloh, let's go back to Jeremiah 7 and conclude with verse 12. Because Jeremiah wants the people in his days to go to Shiloh, to soberly reflect upon what had taken place before, and to think about the lessons that come from Shiloh's history. He wants the nation to change. And he's there at the entrance of Solomon's temple in all its glory with this message. Verse 12.
Which chapter, sorry?
Jeremiah 7 and verse 12. Message of Jeremiah on God's behalf. But go ye now unto my place, which was in Shiloh, where I set my name at the first. And I want you to see what I did to it for the wickedness of my people Israel. And now because ye have done all these works, saith Yahweh, I spoke unto you, rising up early and speaking, but ye heard not. And I called you, but ye answered not. Therefore will I do unto this house at Jerusalem, which is called by my name, wherein ye trust, and unto the place which I have given to you and to your fathers, as I have done to Shiloh. So with those thoughts, we'll conclude our class and look forward to continuing on the story of Shiloh and the lessons that we can learn from Shiloh in our class next Wednesday night, God willing. Thank you.